The night air in Venice shimmered with gold reflections from the Grand Canal. Lanterns danced on rippling water as gondolas glided past, their songs melting into the laughter of the elite gathered for the city's most exclusive art gala. Inside the Palazzo Rezzonico, every eye was fixed on a single painting, a portrait so hauntingly intimate that whispers rippled through the crowd. It was titled Asterisk, The Girl Who Dreamed the Stars. Asterisk. No one knew the artist, only that he signed his name with a mysterious A. But among the admirers stood Isabella Moretti, heiress to one of Italy's richest dynasties and a patron of fine art herself. To her, the painting wasn't just beautiful, it felt personal, like the painter had reached into her soul and painted her secret longing. She turned to her assistant. "Find him," she said softly. "Whoever painted this, I want to meet him." And so she did. Days later, in a small, dimly lit studio tucked behind a narrow Venetian alley, Isabella found him, Adrian Russo. His shirt was smudged with paint, his eyes deep pools of quiet intelligence. He was poor, disheveled, but spoke with the elegance of someone who had lived 1,000 lives. "You painted her," Isabella said, gazing at the canvas again. Adrian smiled faintly. "I paint what I feel, not what I see." Those words lingered. Something about his humility, his charm, the mystery in his every glance, drew her in. Soon, their meetings became longer, their conversations deeper. She visited his studio almost daily under the guise of commissioning art, but both knew it was more than that. Love, fragile yet consuming, began to bloom amid the scent of oil and canvas. But what Isabella didn't know was that Adrian had come into her life with a secret agenda. He wasn't merely a struggling artist. He was a man with a plan. Years ago, his father had worked as a servant in the Moretti mansion, until Isabella's father ruined him, accused of stealing priceless jewels that were later miraculously found. The shame had driven Adrian's father to ruin and death. Adrian had sworn revenge. And Isabella, the pampered heiress who knew nothing of that pain, was his perfect key. He painted her again and again, each portrait a weapon of manipulation, each brushstroke designed to make her trust him more. Soon, she opened her heart and her world to him. Invitations followed, first to private dinners, then family gatherings, until Adrian stood in the grand marble halls of the Moretti estate, surrounded by luxury he'd once only dreamed of. Isabella's father, Lorenzo Moretti, loathed him instantly. A street rat with talent. He sneered one night over dinner. "That's all you are." But Isabella, fierce and in love, defended Adrian. "He's more real than anyone in this room," she declared, her voice trembling with passion. And for a time, Adrian almost believed his own lie. The warmth in her eyes was disarming, her laughter intoxicating. For the first time, vengeance began to lose its sharpness. Until the night she found out the truth. She had overheard him, speaking to a journalist, arranging the release of forged documents that would expose her father's sins. But those documents were not just lies. They were Adrian's twisted revenge plan, one that could destroy her family's name forever. Isabella's heart shattered, but her face remained calm. She said nothing. She let him finish his little performance of love. She even smiled, kissed him softly that night, as if nothing had changed. Then she vanished. When Adrian woke the next morning, she was gone, and so was every trace of his work, his money, his gallery commissions. She had erased him from the art world overnight. Every gallery withdrew his pieces. Every collector turned cold. Even the media painted him as a fraud. He was ruined, exactly as her father had once ruined his. But what Adrian didn't know was that Isabella wasn't finished yet. Weeks later, he received an invitation sealed in gold wax. It bore the Moretti crest. Inside, just one line. Asterisk, if you still believe in art, come find me. Asterisk. Against every instinct, he did. The address led him to a villa in Tuscany, perched above rolling vineyards. There, waiting among easels and canvases, was Isabella, dressed in white, serene yet cold. She regarded him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to see what kind of artist paints with lies," she said. Adrian's voice faltered. "Isabella, She raised a hand. "No, you came for revenge. You found love instead. But now, I will show you what true revenge looks like." She walked to a covered painting, and pulled away the cloth. His breath caught. It was a portrait of him, painted perfectly, broken, desperate, hollow-eyed. I call it Asterisk, the man who destroyed himself. Asterisk. She had already arranged for it to debut at the Venice Gala, the same event where he had first found fame. Only this time, it wasn't admiration he would receive. It was humiliation. As he stared at the portrait, his throat tightened. But somewhere deep inside, the artist in him recognized its brilliance. It wasn't just a painting. It was truth. You become what you hate, Isabella whispered. And I become what you created. She turned away as the sound of cameras flashed outside, the press waiting for a grand unveiling. Adrian stood there, frozen between guilt and admiration, as a woman he once deceived stepped into the light to destroy him in the most poetic way possible, through art. But even as she left, part of her heart ached, because revenge, as sweet as it was, didn't erase the love that once burned between them. And perhaps she wasn't done with him yet, because that night, as the world whispered his ruin, Isabella found herself staring at her own reflection in the portrait's glass, wondering whether she had just avenged her family, or doomed herself to a story she could never escape. The next morning, a new painting appeared mysteriously in her villa. No signature, no name, only a message, scrawled in charcoal at the bottom. Asterisk, even masterpieces can love their creators. Asterisk. She froze, because the handwriting was his. And the portrait? It was her, not as an heiress, not as a woman scorned, but as a soul lost in love. The morning sun spilled to the tall windows of Isabella's villa, stretching its light across the marble floor, glinting against the frame of the mysterious painting. The scent of turpentine lingered faintly, mingling with the aroma of roses that had been placed by her maid hours earlier. Isabella hadn't moved since she found it. Her eyes, red-rimmed from lack of sleep, were fixed on the brushwork, those strokes she knew too well. Adrian's hand was unmistakable, confident yet trembling with emotion, like a man painting from the edge of madness. She touched the canvas lightly, her fingers hovering above the painted version of herself. The softness of the expression, the vulnerability captured in her eyes. It wasn't mockery or manipulation. It was love, pure, unguarded love, and it terrified her more than anything. Her heart began to ache in rhythms she thought she had buried under revenge. She had wanted to ruin him, make him feel the sting of betrayal. But now she wasn't sure who had been the real victor, because this painting felt like a confession. Who brought this here? She asked sharply when her assistant entered the room. No one, Signorina. The guard swears he saw no one come through the gates, but it was leaning against the door when he opened it this morning. She turned back toward the portrait, her mind spinning. Venice was hundreds of miles away. How could Adrian have come here unnoticed? And why? After all she had done to him, after she had burned his name in every gallery and blacklisted him from every auction house, why reach out with love now? She wanted to destroy it, to take a knife and slash through the image, cut away the emotions that tied her to him. But her hand refused. Instead, she whispered, almost trembling, "What are you doing to me, Adrian?" That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, sipping wine, the painting propped against the wall opposite her. Its eyes followed her everywhere. She had always believed power meant control. But this power he still held over her without wealth, without position, without even a name, was something else entirely. Something raw. Something she couldn't cage. By midnight, a storm rolled in over the Tuscan hills. Rain pounded against the windows like impatient fists. The wind howled through the cypress trees, and for a moment, Isabella imagined she heard footsteps in the hall. She told herself it was a storm. She told herself she wasn't afraid. Then 3 soft knocks on the door. Her wine glass trembled in her hand. Every instinct screamed not to open it, yet her feet carried her forward. She unlatched the door, her pulse hammering. Outside, under the soaked canopy of the storm, stood Adrian Russo. His clothes clung to him, his dark hair plastered against his forehead, eyes burning with the same mixture of pain and longing she remembered too well. "Before you slam the door," he said, his voice hoarse, "hear me out." Isabella froze. Her breath caught somewhere between rage and relief. She wanted to hate him, Truly she did, but the sight of him standing there, drenched and desperate, broke something inside her. "You have no right," she said, her voice sharp but trembling. "You destroyed everything that ever mattered to me." "No," Adrian said quietly. "I destroyed myself. You just watched." The simplicity of the words struck her harder than any plea could have. She stepped aside wordlessly, letting him in. The storm's fury trailed behind him as he entered, dripping onto the polished floor. "Why are you here?" she demanded, closing the door with a shaky breath. "Because I couldn't let it end like this," he said. "That painting. You weren't supposed to see it as a trick. It was my truth. I painted it because it's all I have left of you." Her laugh was hollow. "You expect me to believe in your sincerity now? After lies, after betrayal, after you used me like a stepping stone." He flinched at her words, but didn't look away. "I came to ruin you, Isabella. That's true. But somewhere between the brushstrokes and your laughter, I forgot what revenge was for." The firelight flickered, throwing shadows across his face, revealing the exhaustion etched into his features. He looked older, thinner, as though the weight of guilt had sculpted him into someone else entirely. Isabella crossed her arms, trying to build a wall between her and the ache in her chest. "You think a confession changes what you did? You played me, Adrian. You painted lies and called them art." He stepped closer, his voice trembling now. "And you took my soul and turned it into a spectacle. You destroyed me in front of the world. We're both guilty." Her lips parted, but no words came out. He was right. She had sought justice, but ended up mirroring his cruelty. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the storm outside. Then, softly, he said, "Do you know what I realized after losing everything? That revenge doesn't end when you win. It ends when you finally stop needing to hurt back." Something in his tone broke through the fortress around her heart. She looked at him, really looked, beyond the man who lied, beyond the artist who manipulated her, and saw the remnants of the man who once painted her not as an heiress, but as a dream. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, though the words sounded weak, almost pleading. "I had to," he murmured, "because despite everything I still—" His voice trailed off, but she knew the words he couldn't say. She turned away, her pulse racing. "Love doesn't excuse deceit." "No," he said, "but maybe forgiveness does." The rain softened outside, a strange calm settling between thunder's final murmurs. Isabella exhaled, her shoulders trembling. She wanted to tell him to leave. She wanted to say it was too late. But instead, she found herself walking back to the painting, the one he'd left. "You captured me," she said, her fingers brushing the canvas again. "Not as what I am, but what I hide. And I hate you for knowing me that well." Adrian took a step closer. "I didn't need to know you, Isabella. I just needed to see you, and no one ever did they?" Tears stung her eyes, unbidden. She had spent her life surrounded by admirers, flatterers, men who courted her for wealth, not for who she was. And here stood the only man who saw past the diamonds, past the Moretti name, and he'd been the one to destroy her trust. "Why do you think I let you in again?" she asked quietly. He hesitated. "Because part of you still loves me." She looked up sharply, eyes flashing. "No," she whispered. "Because part of me wanted to see if you dare to lie to my face again." He almost smiled, but there was no mockery in it, only sorrow. "Then I deserve whatever you plan next." She stared at him, her heart torn between fury and longing. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't over. Not the hate, not the love, not the story that bound them in a web of passion and ruin. The clock ticked softly in the corner, and lightning illuminated the room once more. She saw him then not as the man who betrayed her, but as the one who might still understand her in ways no one else ever could. "Stay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just for tonight." Adrian looked at her, disbelief flickering across his face. "Isabella, don't speak," she interrupted. "If you say anything, I might change my mind." He nodded slowly, the weight of unspoken emotion pressing between them as they stood in the flickering light. Two souls too broken apart, too proud to surrender. Outside, the rain began again, softer this time, like a rhythm only they could hear, echoing the truth that love and revenge had long since become indistinguishable between them. And as the night deepened, neither of them realized that this fragile truce was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. The morning came cloaked in a hush, the kind of quiet that follows storms and broken hearts. The villa was drenched in pale light, mist rising from the vineyards outside. Isabella sat by the window, watching the dawn bleed slowly into sky, her thoughts heavy and tangled. Adrian had fallen asleep on the couch, his head resting on his arm, as though exhaustion had finally claimed a man who'd fought too long against himself. She should have told him to leave before sunrise, but she hadn't. Something in her refused to let him go. As the first rays touched his face, she saw the man beneath the pain, the dreamer, the artist, the boy who had lost everything yet still found beauty in ruin. For the first time, she felt something shift deep inside her, a quiet, dangerous tenderness she couldn't name. She rose, walking over to him, her bare feet silent on the marble. She watched him breathe, the steady rhythm of a man haunted by both guilt and love. She could have left him there, could have called her guards, could have ended this tangled story the way her father would have, with control, with dominance, with power. But she wasn't her father. She was something else now, shaped by heartbreak and vengeance, molded by art and obsession. She brushed her fingers against his hair, whispering, "Why did you have to love me like this?" His eyes opened slowly, catching hers in the half-light. "Because I didn't know how not to." Something inside her cracked, like a frozen river thawing in the first touch of spring. Hours later, they stood on the terrace overlooking the valley. The sun painted everything gold. Adrian turned to her, his face soft yet uncertain. "I'll leave if you want me to. You've already taken everything I had. But if there's even a piece of you that still remembers what we were, tell me now." Isabella looked at him, her gaze unreadable. "And if I told you I remember everything, the first painting, the lies, the laughter, what then? Would you stay?" He smiled faintly, almost sadly. "Only if you let me paint you one last time." That sentence hung in the air like a fragile promise. They returned to the studio, the same place where their worlds had once collided, where love had been born out of deceit and art had become their battlefield. Adrian set up his easel quietly, his movements precise, reverent. Isabella sat by the window, her white dress glowing in the sunlight. The first strokes came slow, deliberate. She watched him work, saw how his hands trembled, not from uncertainty, but from emotion. Each line, each shade seemed to carry the weight of confession. Hours passed in silence. Only the sound of the brush, the whisper of wind, and their shared breaths. When he finally stepped back, the canvas revealed not a portrait of an heiress or a symbol of revenge, but something else entirely, a woman free of masks. Vulnerable. Human. Her expression wasn't proud or vengeful, it was peaceful. She stared at it for a long moment. "You painted forgiveness," she murmured. He nodded. "Because that's all that's left between us." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't look away. For so long, she had believed revenge would make her whole again. Instead, it had hollowed her out. And now, through his art, through his shattered honesty, she found the thing she didn't know she needed: release. But the world wasn't kind to tragic lovers, and the past didn't loosen its grip easily. That evening, as they shared quiet wine and laughter that felt strangely new, a convoy of black cars rolled up the hill. The Moretti crest gleamed under the setting sun. Isabella froze, her glass trembling. "My father," she whispered. Lorenzo Moretti stepped out, flanked by guards. His fury was barely contained, his pride a weapon as sharp as a blade. "You brought him here?" he thundered. "After everything he's done?" Adrian rose slowly, meeting the man's glare without fear. "She didn't bring me. I came." "Then you'll leave the same way you came, empty-handed." Lorenzo's voice was cold as steel. "You think I'll let a nobody ruin my daughter again?" Isabella stepped forward. "Father, stop. This isn't your decision anymore." "You're blind," Lorenzo hissed. "He used you once. He'll do it again." Adrian's voice was calm, almost weary. "You're right, signore. I used her because of what you did to my father. I came for revenge. But she changed that. She changed me." Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "Do you expect me to believe that?" "No," Adrian said softly. "But I don't need you to." The silence between them was heavy, fragile. Then Isabella took a step toward Adrian, her voice trembling but firm. If you want to punish him, you'll have to punish me too, because I'm the reason he stayed. Her father looked at her, disbelief flashing across his face. You'd throw away everything for him? She met his gaze without flinching. Maybe I'm not throwing it away. Maybe I'm finally choosing it for myself. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with a look of disgust, Lorenzo turned away. You've made your choice. Don't come back to me when you regret it. He gestured to his men and left without another word, the sound of engines fading into the dusk. The world seemed to exhale when he was gone. Isabella's body shook with quiet relief. Adrian reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. The next weeks were quiet, almost unreal. They lived like ghosts between two worlds, her past of opulence, his a struggle, meeting somewhere in the middle. The scandal faded. The whispers died down. Slowly, their story became a myth. Asterisk the heiress who fell for the artist who tried to ruin her, and the art that saved them both. Asterisk. But Adrian knew peace couldn't last forever. His health had begun to fail. Too many sleepless nights, too much burden carried in silence. He never told her, not wanting to stain the fragile happiness they had found. Instead, he poured what life he had left into one final masterpiece, a vast mural painted on the villa's interior wall. It showed their journey, the pain, the betrayal, the love that had outlived both. He finished it one golden afternoon, just as the sun dipped low. Isabella found him there, standing before the completed mural, pale and trembling but smiling. "It's done," he whispered. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It's us." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a peace she hadn't seen before. "Promise me something," he said quietly. "Don't hide behind walls again. Live, even if it's without me." Her throat tightened. "Don't say that. You're not leaving me." He smiled faintly. "I was never meant to stay. I was meant to show you what love could be when it's not painted in lies." That night, under skies scattered with stars, Adrian Russo took his last breath beside the woman he had once deceived and later adored with every shattered piece of his soul. In the days that followed, Isabella sealed his studio. She didn't weep in public, didn't issue statements. She simply disappeared from society, retreating into quiet solitude. Years later, at a private exhibition in Venice, a new collection stunned the art world, signed with a single I. The centerpiece was a portrait titled Asterisk, the man who taught me the meaning of love. Asterisk. Those who saw it swore the eyes of the man in the painting followed them, alive with pain, beauty, and devotion. And though Isabella never returned to the limelight, legends whisper of her villa, of a mural no one was allowed to see, and a room that smelled forever of paint and rain. Some said she still spoke to him there, in the quiet hours before dawn. Others claimed they saw two figures walking the vineyard paths at twilight, a man with a brush and a woman in white, hand in hand, their silhouettes fading into gold light. Perhaps love, after all, doesn't die. It transforms into art, into memory, into eternity. And somewhere in the silence between brushstrokes and heartbeats, their story still breathes, unfinished, immortal, and endlessly beautiful.